and we will entertain motions. If they're specified in the agenda.
A motion to enter into exec section for the purpose, oh, for the love of God. Discussions regarding matters related to memorandum of agreement between district and bargaining units, which would alter terms of negotiated contracts, matters leading to the employment, promotion, demotion, discipline, suspension, dismissal, or removal of a particular person or corporation, matters pertaining to the work, performance, and tenure eligibility of administrators and teachers.
Second.
Moved by Karen, second by Jill. Any questions, discussion? All in favor? The motion passes unanimously. We'll be back around 7 p.m. for the votes. Hope to be back sooner. That's basically our agenda, and out of respect for everyone's time, we are returning to session and asking if there are any modifications to the agenda. Hearing none, we will continue on. Public comment. Item agenda 4.1. Or do we have anyone who signed up? I say it all the time, there is no public comment. I'll assume there are no board responses. That brings us to our wonderful student reps. I missed our last meeting, so I don't know who went first. High school is.
Yeah.
On Monday, we were discussing issues around it being difficult to get into the school for students. We had a very productive conversation with Mr. Trumbull and Mr. Bryman about hardening the school, and we're thinking about potential ways to make better the access to school or improve students' knowledge on the correct ways to enter the building. Additionally, we are brainstorming ways to make entering and exiting buildings efficient while also ensuring student safety. However, there might not be any easy solution.
The band concert happened just last week and I hear it went really well. The IHS orchestra concert is tomorrow and the doors open at 7:15 p.m. And then the choir concert is next Tuesday and the jazz band concert is next Wednesday, which is really exciting. And we've also been super stoked about free lunch. Many students have been taking part in it since it began at the beginning of the month. It also means that lunch lines have gotten a lot longer, but it's great that students are super excited about this opportunity. Also, the non-perishable food drive will be ending this Friday. Those items from the food drive, together with main courses purchased with a Wegmans donation, staff donations, and money from Latka's sales to staff, Latka's made by Ms. Bergman, will be delivered to IHS families next week by staff volunteers. They will also be supplemented with food from our community closet kitchen, which was founded by librarian Ms. McDonald and has grown a lot over the past year. Ms. Burke and Avid students have been spearheading the drive with help from Tea Club, and we'll be packing the holiday food basket next Monday.
Hi, everybody. Many congratulations to our students and staff who were acknowledged tonight. Claire, Lucina, great job. Shameless plug for my colleague. You guys are an inspiration to me, the rest of the student body, and probably just about anybody you encounter. So many congratulations. I've spoken about this a few times in front of the board, but with regards to our recycling initiative, things are picking up. Progress might not always come immediately, but it does come. That's the goal, at least. And slowly and steadily, we're moving. So the pilot has started. Mr. Scott Taylor and us have worked together. He's put out 6 recycling bins with the help of Dr. Bryman as well. And these are currently located in H Courtyard, Q Lobby, C Lobby, Cafeteria, the library, and A Lobby. So we're trying to spread them around the school in different locations so as to ensure that we get as large a sample area as possible. Although the sample size is small, starting with just 6 bins, the goal is that if our marketing campaign becomes better at convincing people not to contaminate the bins, that eventually it'll lead to a more school-wide program. So far we have labels installed, 2-page labels, one concerning the dangers of not recycling and the other just with general information about how to recycle. Obviously, this won't help for everything, but like we've said before, we're hoping to get lids with small openings, and that's currently being worked on. So in the next coming weeks, we hope that there will be some lids available for those cans, which are of the larger variety. I think it was 40 gallons. I could be wrong about that. And the LIDs will have small enough goals so as to disincentivize students from tossing full trays of food or other sources of contamination into the recycling. And we hope this will be coming in the next couple of weeks.
Good evening, everybody. So in addition to all of that, we are very proud of all of our sports teams in the fall for being scholar athletes, which means that 75% of the team had a GPA of over 90%, which is really impressive. So congratulations to all of them. So for the senior class, the first round of college application decisions are coming out within this week and next week. So we are all very nervous and we all have our fingers crossed. But just in case people are feeling nervous, the counselors have instituted a new mental check-in center where you just drop in, you ask to see a counselor, any counselor that is available sees you, talks to you, and tries to help you come up with solutions for whatever is seems to be the issue, or if you just need to talk, just like gives you a safe, open space to have a discussion. We're also discussing how to improve the bathroom situation because as a gender neutral bathrooms have rolled out, which we are very excited about, and we are happy that our school can provide such a safe and inclusive environment for all people, and that is something that we hold very dear. There are unfortunately less stalls, which does mean it takes a little longer to go to the bathroom, so we're trying to see if there's anything we can do to mitigate that slightly not great effect of this otherwise wonderful initiative that we are all very happy to partake in. And the last thing is that we're still working on the flow of the parking lot issue because around 8:50 in the morning, everybody's going in and out, and there's just a little segment of the parking lot that is a little too tight for comfort and can get a little nerve-wracking when you are driving. That's all. Thank you so much.
All right. So first and foremost, we'd like to acknowledge that Odin was not able to come here tonight because he is sick. So we hope that he gets well soon. Secondly, we had our first round of discussion and feedback around revising our school's decision-making document, and there's currently a big revision going on around the purview of which decision-making bodies get to decide what in the school government. And it's gonna, all these revisions and feedback and amendments that we've gotten are gonna go through a couple of more decision-making bodies before we finally come to a close, hopefully later this winter on our revisions.
If we're lucky, later this winter. It's been a long process. It's been being revised for about 4 years now by a smaller group of staff and students. And we've gotten some really great feedback from our first ASM. One of them being that students really feel strongly that we need to re-implement our curriculum and course feedback, which is something that site-based council has run in the past and has since just kind of dissipated. So we've been working hard at figuring out how to do that efficiently. And we also recently had our winter carnival, which is a replacement / expansion on our pasta dinner. And that took a lot of hard work, but it turned out to be a really beautiful night. We had bake sales, musical performances, and Spanish trip put together a silent auction that had over 90 items, which was really impressive and great to see. And it was just a great opportunity for us to build community and also make a lot of great progress on our fundraising goals.
Yeah. And lastly, we'd like to thank Dr. Brown for providing us with the fire code law concerning the doors and the murals at OCS. We really appreciate your speedy sending to that. One thing we did notice in the code law was that the rule does apply to egress doors. I think this is in section 1010 on page 160. That there not be like drapes, the curtains or decorations on the egress doors. However, the doors in that you're concerned with that have the murals on are not egress doors. They're doors that are within the building and they don't allow you to exit. So I guess, if there's any clarification that can be made there or, anything that can be cleaned up, that'd be wonderful.
Section 10.
Manual.
Thank
I'm going to.
Hold on.
Pretty thick. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, board member responses.
Question for you all, but also just in general for us. Mentioned the parking lot. Parking lots are an issue at a lot of schools. I mean, is there a way for facilities to look into this to see how to help make them more flowing and accessible at the really busy times?
The answer is yes, and they're engineers. I don't know with Ms. Verba, we did one years ago, when we had engineers come look at the flow and give us recommendations. Maybe it's time for that again. So the answer is yes, and we will reach out.
Let's also be clear, one of the responses would be less parking lots and striping as well, right? There's only so much space.
Yeah.
But yes,
Right.
that's
Like
great.
walking and buses utilize what's there is, I mean, I know billing leaders always stress it out.
Is that an item that should be on a facilities agenda at some point in time? We'll let you amend it now.
And I guess related to that, you get the sense that it's or is it more of like, making sure all drivers know what the protocol or the norms are?
In my opinion, it's kind of both, because what happens is, as you guys see, there's like an entrance and an exit on the front, an entrance and an exit like towards the back of the parking lot, towards Lake Street, and then one more that is only an exit. But that little part between the entrance and the exit is technically a 2-lane road, so people will come out that way to like get through to the other exit, which is totally like, it's a totally legal thing to do. They're not doing anything wrong. It's just a very tight space, which does make it a little.
less than ideal.
Well, yeah, and also, most of the people who are driving to school like myself, we haven't been driving for very long, so. I might just be a little more scared than I should be when it comes to driving, but.
Can I take a
Yeah,
time
please.
in? Yeah, so I'm a very new driver, like a couple weeks. And I have last period at the high school. And don't often get to leave right at the end of the day because of practice, but when I do, I will say that it is a little tricky. I think that most of it is sometimes like the actual parking spaces just being like close together, like there's very little. Yeah, there's very little leeway, but I think even more than that, even just like increased signage would be helpful, like I think. Like she was saying, like. Just the flow in general, like one person totally messes up. Yeah,
I'll be.
yes.
A quick plug for later in the meeting. We're gonna be talking about capital project and long range capital plan later. An example would be what we did at South Hill, when this issue came up and traffic was stacked up for miles, particularly around dismissal time. We had engineers come in and look at the flow, suggest improvements that were costly, but we were able to plan over the course of 4 or 5 years. And now we have a situation where you can get up route to IC and beyond without the traffic jam. So we can, everything is possible. It just may take time and a lot of money.
Absolutely.
Well, we did some of the things that we did years ago as well as Penfield, so it's something that we're familiar with trying to make happen. So we'll bring it. Additional responses from board colleagues.
Oh, but LACS, it was a pleasure to hear about the carnival being such a success, because I heard from someone else at LACS about it. So congratulations to all the students who put so much effort into it. And of course, the staff. I know they
Of
did.
course, absolutely.
Just a shout out to our award winners. Rock on.
Thanks.
I've said this before, just expect us to follow you after you leave here. If you're not done with us. We still in contact with folks who were in your seat 10 years ago.
Thank you greatly. We will continue on with our agenda. That brings us to approval of the consent agreement. We will entertain motions.
I move for the approval of all consent agenda items listed on the consent agenda. Consideration of accounts, personnel reports, students, and minutes of previous season as presented.
There you go. Moved by Karen, second by Adam. Questions, discussion items? Hope board members had a chance. I know that it was submitted late, but we did just receive the bid information. Hope folks have gotten a chance to review that. Yeah.
6.1 about the awarding of contracts. I guess, so I saw that all the RFPs went out to at least 3 bidders. And on one of the items, we only got 1 bid back. So and this might be just an offline conversation. Just curiosity about what the process is when we only get 1 bid back to ensure that reasonable bid or that it is aligned with market prices, just things like that. It happened to be the largest item of those of the different contracts. I just curious about that.
Can I call upon you? To answer this question.
Absolutely. For those of you that don't know, I'm Amanda Bergon, the Chief Operations Officer. I get to work on many items for the district, one of which is the capital project. When items go out to bid, it is much more than what you see here. There are portals all across the state where this work is announced, right? They go in newspapers and the media, they go in online like co-ops, right? So this is all pushed out. There's also active phone calls to all different contractors, right? Saying, okay, Ithaca is putting out for the bid. There's a timing situation that you consider, right? We want to get out before the Cornell projects and before other school districts projects. And unfortunately, there were a tremendous number of projects in this region. A lot of southern tier of projects got out like 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 days before us. So like Binghamton City School District got out before us, and there was one, I think Johnson City has one, or Vestal. So those all impact sort of the market, right, of like who's available to us. And this is all very prescribed. So the work, the scope of the work with all the addendums and everything, that's public information. You could actually, as a person, a community member, register and look at all that information. And then, you really cannot sway or influence who is submitting. This is public bidding. We are a government entity. So we must take the lowest bidder, even if there's only one, right? And we can deny, or we can say like that they didn't meet what the requirements were of the bid. There's a process after people submit their bids and they're shown to be the lowest bidder called de-scoping. And so you sit with the contractor. That's what we pay campus construction for, to literally go through item by item. Where's your budget for this? Where's your budget for this? Did you include this? Do you have this? And they actually make sure that their bid is complete, right? Because there are times when they've missed an addendum, or they've missed a particular item. I know with one of the contracts, they said, oh, one of the groups actually withdrew their bid because they realized they didn't include any of the insulation of the spaces after they abated them and went back in and repiped them. And they missed that completely. And it was like millions of dollars worth of work. So they actually withdrew their bid. There are also, we meet with the attorneys afterward. With this one specifically, we went through to make sure that we were, talking with him about, okay, well, this was off budget, or this was higher than we expected. What are our rights? What can we do? So there are certain loopholes where you can actually pull bids, but the longer you wait, the more the competition is. And the reason why we're bringing this to you so quickly, this was opened on December 6th and we're asking for December 12th, is because the sooner we can get these contracts in order, then we know that we are in their queue. We are part of their book of business, and that we then are guaranteed to be able to have that work start on the schedule.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's amazing, because my next question is about whether or not the bids are full responsive.
Yeah, and these are all, there's contracts, right, our attorneys worked with all the contracts, those contracts are vetted with him. Sometimes with the attorneys of the contractors, and those are always hopefully to benefit the district, and we've had to be on those contracts, before, when things were getting, things were being said, like, for example, it was a force majeure, so therefore we don't have, we're not able to get the product at the pricing we promised you, so you should pay us more. And we said, no. The contract actually doesn't allow for that. Yeah, so they do work in our favor as much as they can.
I mean, and my experience has also been, please let me know if I'm off here, that beyond the bidding that's happened with our contract construction site managers, also working with our architects. Sometimes the architects miss things and the contract would be, well, you missed this in the drawings. It's actually gonna be 500,000 more.
Right.
Or the architect will be like, actually, we don't need that. We remove that from the bid. And so there are multiple things that are taking a look at it, not just, is that fair?
That is very fair, and it can also happen after the bid is accepted, right? So that dialogue never stops. As the contractors dig deeper and deeper and deeper into the plans, there's a whole process that is documented. We have a massive portal of imagine every question and every response to that question, every follow-up question and response to that follow-up question. That is all cataloged, because at the end of the day, if this were ever to be litigated, you want to have those records. If something were to fail, you want to have those records, right? So the plans are done by humans, which means that there is always an opportunity for something to be missed or room for error. And that's why that back and forth is really important throughout the entire process.
Does it help with change order? Help with, yeah.
It is, this, you can speak to the project before this one.
I cannot express to you the amount of amazement I've had with this capital project. And the fact that I think we can count, maybe even on one hand, probably at least two hands, the number of change orders, whereas our last capital project, they were happening almost every board meeting, and sometimes for sizable amounts of money. This has been one of the smoothest processes that I've participated in my 14 years of capital projects. So we have some really good folks doing some really thorough work, and the numbers are matching up. And one of the change orders was actually returning money back to the district. And I didn't even know what to do with that. Like we almost threw a party for that one, right? So yes, we've been our current folks that we're working with, our current partners have been amazing in limiting the number of change orders. And other folks are not having the same experience that we're having.
And to be clear, we're talking about this during COVID with supply chain prices and increases in prices, and that's impressive. Okay.
Couple of delays, but beyond that, I mean, that's.
And workforce.
And weather, right, weather and workforce. So that was agenda item, I can't read off my glasses, let me just make sure. 6.1. I don't know if there are additional questions about anything else in the consent agenda. Hearing no other questions, discussion items, we will call the question. All in favor of the consent agenda? And I'm gonna vote yes if you can make me abstain from the minutes. Great, thank you. The consent passes. We will continue on with our agenda, and that is the superintendent's report. Dr. Brown, good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you as well. Thank you for the opportunity to share. I'll invite Natalia to join me as she has an item we wish to put in front of the community. While she's coming up, I wish to underscore and highlight the commendation ceremony that was mentioned. We recognize 450 scholars and educators for extraordinary achievements. The criteria is typically a first, second, or third place finish in a regional, state, or national competition, and/or extraordinary efforts when it comes to our culture of love. This was the biggest event we've had, and as I opened, it was an artifact and receipt for folks who keep receipts of how we are excellent. The academic achievement has skyrocketed here in our school district. The number of national merit scholars, the scores on AP exams, the enrollment in our highest level course offerings, our numbers and diversity in our co-curricular programs. See, I hope people saw what we saw when we made those recommendations, when we made those, when we put those certificates in the hands of young people and saw that young people were representing all of our elementary school, all of our middle schools, and all areas of our community. So thank you all for coming. We will do this again in the spring. Hopefully that time we'll do it outdoors. Hopefully, we tried that a few times and it got rained out, but the next one will hopefully be outdoors, and we hope it will be even bigger than what we had today. So thank you all. And with that, Ms. Thompson, you have one item you wish to share with folks. Yeah.
I do, yes. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Lily Talcott. I get to serve as the Deputy Superintendent of Schools for the school district. And this year, we tried something totally new as a school district through our academic calendar. So the Board of Education last year adopted an academic calendar that has 2 half days for caregiver educator conferences at our middle schools, right? There's always these full day conference days for elementary, right? And then middle school, nothing, right? Nothing formalized, right? So this was totally new. Big, huge shout out to Associate Principal Ramel Liverpool at DeWitt and Carlin Gray, Principal at DeWitt, who initially came to me about this idea. We have another one that's scheduled for the spring, and the middle school leadership teams are meeting with union leadership as well tomorrow afternoon. And they're going to talk about some feedback and some ideas for actually tweaking it moving forward. So I may come to you and say, hey, we need to make some adjustments based on how educators experienced it, how families experienced it, how kids experienced it. I just wanted to put that on the docket and make sure that the community understood this was a really exciting endeavor to allow for educators and families to communicate in more formalized ways and to allow for contract time for people to do that. And it was our first go around. So probably wasn't gonna be perfect, right? So we probably need to make some adjustments and we wanna be responsive to people's needs. So you might see next month, I'll be putting a new calendar in front of you, maybe, maybe not. But I just wanted to let folks know that it was overall, you know, a really great thing and also had some complications and we know we need to adjust.
So I have a question. Was it a half day in the morning or in the afternoon?
It was in the afternoon and it was on a Wednesday. And I'll say just about every middle school educator was very tired the next day. Thanks.
Is that it?
That's all I have for you. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. We'll continue with our agenda. That brings us to agenda item 11.1, which is capital project resolution. As we proceed with this conversation, the board has access to three different resolutions with different figures. It is my thoughts, but again, it's the will of the board to decide that this will be a continuation of a conversation. And while it says action and discussion, that today will be a discussion day with the option of putting it back on a calendar or agenda for our next meeting, which is next Tuesday, December 19th. And so I don't want any board member to feel pressure that we have to make a decision this evening. I do think it's important to remind the community that this is part of an ongoing conversation. We began some of these conversations at finance and facilities committees, on multiple finance and facilities committees, not just one, even though there was a very extended combined finance and facilities committee from November 16th. There's been documentation that folks can find out. This will be our second full board meeting of having this conversation. And so this is part of a long-term planning process to engage in discussion and dialogue. I just thought it was important for us to frame that way. So, Dr. Brown, I don't know if your team is here to respond to board questions. If there is anything that you all want to do to frame what we're going to be doing next, what is our best approach?
Some very brief framing, but and here to respond to any questions. I thought I'd invite Ms. Verba to come, just explain to the board the resolutions, why they're there, and what involved with those particular resolutions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, like we always do, right? We try to make sure that we follow the legal process and don't misstep in any manner when we're coming to you with any kind of support around decision making. The reason why you're seeing the resolutions written the way that they are with that seeker language, right? So that's the State Environmental Quality Review Act. When we met with our attorneys about, okay, how might we develop these resolutions for the Board of Ed? They said, well, first you have to show then the seeker resolution, because what you are essentially saying, we described all the different options that we talked about, from that pie chart to the work that we were talking about, the transportation department, right, to potentially a new transportation site facility. All of those things currently right now would be classified as a type 2, which means that under the State Environmental Quality Review Act, we are stating that that would not have a significant adverse impact on our environment, right? And seeker, it's mandated, there's like it's very prescribed, it'll tell you like the square footage and or acreage that would be impacted to make an environmental impact. So right now, upon that first look, that's why we're saying these are type 2s. That can always be modified as we change. If we changed our scope, if there were additions, we can always modify and say, in fact, this is different from a type 2. But right now, if we were to take a pathway, and when we're ready to take a pathway, regardless of the threshold of authority that you're asking the voters to give us to borrow up to over the course of the next 10 or 12 years, we have to make an environmental impact statement first and foremost. So that's why that is written that way, and that's what you're just seeing, that new layer. And then those 3 different amounts align with the options that have been in all the presentations thus far, right? Option A is that about 15 million or up to 15 million, and that is the electrification of the enhancement of Bostwick Road, right? Working with NICEAG to get the proper transformers, running the proper conduit, and all of the infrastructure work that has to do with the panels and electrical. And then I think in addition also of the bus wash, we have to make sure we remember that, because that's important for the life of our buses. The second one is up to 40 million, and that is inclusive of what I just described, and a new bus garage on the Bostwick Road site that will most likely be on a different location on that lot. You're probably where the storage facility buildings are, but that utilizing the space that we have right now so we don't interrupt the operations, right? So we still have a space for the routers and the dispatchers and all the bus drivers and the aides to be able to meet together with the director to run the operations. Then the third option is based on our meeting with fiscal advisors, right? With the question of, okay, if we were to take a look at this opportunity to meet the state mandate to electrify our buses by a certain date and time that is told to us by the state, should we look at this as an opportunity to also incorporate some other needs, concerns, challenges that we're facing with infrastructure, with our campuses, with our buildings, and then what would that threshold be, right? Where would be our opportunity to ask for authority up to a certain amount that we would then phase out the work like we're doing right now in that same model, and then borrow accordingly, right? So not the whole amount, but as we go, we'll need, 14 million for this piece, or 16 million for this piece, or 22 million for this piece. And we would put that over the course of time, just like we're doing now. So essentially it's the different authority from the voters to allow you to borrow over the course of time up to a certain amount. And then what our architect did in a very draft, very rough form, I promised him I would say that over and over again, was that pie chart that sort of said, okay, just from our facilities evaluation, these are some of the things that we know are higher priority. And if we were to put them sort of into like a, where would we kind of allocate the funds to, right? You would see things like health and safety initiatives, parking lots, electric, entryways. I mean, there were just so many things with a little slice for visioning, right?
I know that this has been discussed over and over again, but I also think it always bears repeating. For any of these resolutions, the way in which the money is spent is very specified. Can you speak to that as well?
So what we are asking of the public, regardless of the amount of money, right? Is that over a period of time, typically it's about, 10 years. Over the next 10 years, we will enter into a design development phase for each of the projects that we want to undertake. We would do the bidding process, right? Once we develop the design, that would be submitted to state ed. That would be approved. Upon approval, you go and you get the bids for all the contractors. Those are accepted or not. Then you enter into the construction phase after the phasing and scheduling with all of the stakeholders to ensure that, you have swing space and you're able to do the work in this timely manner and try to do the least impact to our students and our staff as possible. And that all goes on the master schedule. And then when you determine what that scope of work is, that's when you would go out and you would bond for money, not for the whole amount that you were authorized for, but for that slice, right, of what that work would be. So right now, I'll use the current example. In 2019, the voters authorized us for $120 million. We did not borrow $120 million, right? We are authorized over the course of time to borrow up to that amount in phases. And so the phases have been on average about 20 million, and that's very rough, right? And that's what you see in our debt service line, not all of the 20 million, but the payments, right? Just like you would with a mortgage, you're paying a certain amount each month or each year to pay off the entire loan, right? And so that's what you see in our debt service line. Our debt service line is toward the end of the budget document. It is a combination of payments that we still owe on past projects back from before the project that we had approved in 2019 from the 1997 project. That is principal and interest payments of amounts of money that we borrowed at that time, along with some new principal and interest of borrowings that we have. You cannot transfer that money into other areas of the budget. It is very specific to be used for capital purposes. It is tracked because it actually allows for us to gain aid, which means that for every dollar that we spend, we get money back from the state on that money. So it's right now we're at about 59 cents on the dollar coming back to us for every dollar that we spend. And that comes in as revenue. So we work with a group called Fiscal Advisors that actually sets this out on a schedule for us. And based on our goals of the way that we want to manage that debt service line, that is how they will work to ensure that we have principal and interest payments that fall within that. And so that is where it is found. And you can see that in our audit reports as well. There's a lot of information in our audit about our capital spending in debt service.
Board members, questions?
I have a so the $40 million option, that doesn't include any of the projects that were laid out in that book, in this book.
No, it does not.
Okay, so my question is like, so if as a community, we only approve, let's say we put the 40 million out on the table, how can you do any of these things? Can you do any of these things? Like say you need a roof or a parking lot. I know some of those things are in there in the 125, right, option. But like what would happen to a school district that only approved 40 million? I know only 40 million, but 40 million that's earmarked for certain projects, but none of these projects that we might need money for.
Right.
Stuff like
Yeah, well, we can take the risk and not meet the state mandate for electrification of our fleet. And not do the bus work
that. Oh, okay, so like.
and allocate 40 million to the facilities evaluation document and roll the dice. And then determine what they're gonna do if we don't meet that mandate, right?
But let's say we've already gone to bid and we broke ground on a new facility.
Okay.
And we have a boiler break or a roof leak. We're going to fund balance. Or it's gonna continue to leak, and we're putting buckets in there. I mean, I've been in school districts that are really struggling to meet the needs. When they've only gone out for earmark projects. But yeah, fund balance is the place to go. That's savings account.
Or you patch mark and try to hold on to the next election cycle to add it but it's
You
still,
could do a new referendum.
you're still gonna try to find ways to take money from someplace, right? So it would be probably fund balance or someplace
Right.
else.
If you wanna pay for it in your general fund, right, which is what the voters approved, that's our, like our budgeted amount in our facilities budget. It would still behoove us to go through the process of trying to submit it to state education department. But it's gonna be in your budget somewhere, it's just gonna be in a different line item, right? It's gonna be, you're still gonna have to go out, and then we're gonna have to find the staff here to do the bidding process and do the de-scoping and serve as clerk of the works to manage that project, right? So there's the capital project, the way that we've designed it, right? You have the architecture and engineering firm, you have the construction management firm as part of the costs that are built in to what we're asking for capital project work through the referendum.
Can I ask an addendum to Adam's question?
Sure.
If we didn't go through a capital project and we did have a roof that failed, say it's $3 million, whatever it's gonna be, we know it'll be a couple million, right? If it was an emergency cost, would it still be aidable?
So emergency costs are aidable and emergency costs are very prescribed, like it must be an absolute failure that like you cannot use that space, like. So the roof collapsed in a space in a school district near us. And they were no longer able to use that area for instruction. And so that was closed off. And what that just means is you still have to come up with the money, right? We would still have to like go for borrowing and get the money. It just means that the aid comes back faster to a district versus over the course of 15 years, which has come back in a shorter amount of time. So you, yes, there are districts, as Dr. Brown says, who he has colleagues that are dealing with failures, but not emergencies. That is probably a worst case scenario because your aid goes over the course of many years, and they're essentially saying you should have planned for that, right? Like that is something. It wasn't like an act of nature that like ripped off the roof or something, right? It's like you let this fail. It was well beyond warranty.
Hold on to my apologies. You said you had a couple.
Oh, that's good.
Thanks, sorry.
Very interested in a new transportation facility and, moving with all haste toward the electrification of the school fleet. There's a huge gap between option B and option C. And I think I'm wondering why we don't have that 40 million or whatever it is for the transportation upgrade and the electrification, plus 9 million a year for the next 3 years, which is how we normally deal with things like roofs leaking or boilers dying or whatever. So if you were to do that, that's 70 million instead of 100 million plus. And yes, I understand that wouldn't stretch out for 10 years. But the reality is we'd be coming back in 3 or 4 years probably anyway for additional capital. It's not like if we get this 100+ million, the school district is all set and it won't be asking for any other money beyond its normal operating budget. It doesn't work that way because there's always something else.
We will always have to go to the voters for referendums that are related to our capital, right? I think to answer, if there was any comment that I could make, Jill, would be like, how often are you going to the voters? That's the difference, right? I mean, going to the voters for 125 million means that you actually are able to have a longer amount of time, a longer time frame to be able to plan for and to address the things in the facility evaluation. If you ask for less than that, it just means that you're going to be going to the voters more frequently, because that is not going to change, right? But whether you have authorized 50 million or authorized 125 million, you're going to have roofs that need to be replaced on a certain schedule. So it just means, are we going to the voters once and we're going to be able to do 3 roofs with that? Or are we going to the voters 3 times and we're going to do 3 roofs with that, right? It just is a matter of how often we're going to the voters to authorize the amount of money that is the maximum allowance, right?
And again, the board, I don't think our debt service, I don't think that the way that we would be coming to you for bonding would be any different. It would just mean that we would have to go to the voters more frequently to get authorization up to a certain amount. Because what we're doing is we're asking for less, right? But the same amount of work is still going to be there. You just have to ask for it more frequently.
And at one point, that was presented as sort of an option. It's like, well, do you want to go to the public every 3 or 4 years, or do you want to go 10 years with the understanding that it may well be, there may be other requests in between?
Yeah.
And my argument for doing it more frequently, well, one is the voters in this community have been exceptionally supportive of the school, but I don't anticipate that changing. So, beyond that, my feeling is asking for less money more frequently allows us as a board and perhaps as a larger community to keep more careful track on what's being spent, how the plans are coming along, and how it's all being managed. I don't have your background, but it's a gut sense of mine that I don't know, there was a guy running for was it governor a few years back, and he just kept going. His main campaign speech was the rent is too damn high. And that's kind of the way I feel the capital project. For me, it's too damn high. But I would be more than happy to support half of that, which covered the transportation upgrades, the electrification, and the additional 8 to 10 million a year that we need to spend anyway on our priority. That's just getting my thoughts out there.
Matt, is there a different resolution that we need to bring next week, if I'm understanding correctly, because we need 40 million for the transportation facility, plus an additional 7 or 8 per year, that isn't captured in the current resolution.
Correct.
So what would that number be? And I'm asking if the board would prepare a different resolution to think through and talk about it.
I think that's always an option. I think we should hear all questions, conversations, and then make some sort of determination. If that's okay with the board, can hear from everybody first, and then actually.
I have a follow-up question that would help me contextualize this. So you mentioned a 2019 referendum, right? It was for 125, or excuse me, 120 million for capital project. And then, did I hear you right, there was a 1997 one?
There was one back in
2008.
I'm sorry. That's right.
Yeah,
It was 97 million. My apologies. I went back to the 90s because it's a really.
No, I probably heard you.
Just so it was completely me. I actually took the amount. 97 was a great year. It was a great year. I'm so sorry. No, it was in 2000. I want to say it was in 2008. You asked for 97 million.
Okay, so that,
And so that was an error on my part. Right. And then in 2019, we asked for 120 million.
Okay.
And the reason why this is overlapping the 2019 is because the scope of the 2019 project, we're going to be building all the way through of summer of 2028, 2029, Jill. I think we've got like,
Way out there.
oh my gosh. So what we're trying to do is get this authorization to overlap so that we can roll. We know that we have to get the electrification of Boswick Road in order, because we actually have a grant submission that we're going to hear about in January for 15 electric buses that will be essentially paid for at about $450,000 a pop, right? So that is a massive grant. If we receive it, that will be like buses that gets us well toward our goal of the electrification of our whole fleet. But without the electrification of the actual site, we can't, and the facility and all the work that needs to go into it, we won't be able to plug them in.
okay,
And that will be a real problem. And so at minimum, right, that's where we started, right? With this new referendum was like, we've got to do the infrastructure work to be able to plug those buses in if and when we get that grant. And then we're already applying for another 4 with the phase 3 EPA grant. And then there is a NYSERDA monies that we're also gonna be applying for as well. So we're gonna grab every dollar of funding we possibly can for the electrification of the fleet. But at this moment in time, at minimum, we have to, if we want to stay on track and we want to accept those buses and accept that grant, we would have to be able to do that 15 million worth of work. And that's why there's an overlap, because the 2019, it's not spent and we haven't borrowed for it, but it is planned. We know that this is going to go all the way through a 10-year cycle, and this one's going to overlap so that we can get that bus piece in order.
Okay, so I appreciated the clarification that the $40 million does not include anything from here, unless it's the bus stuff that's in here. So I guess the $125 million number, if I were to take this is, I mean, for those that don't know, this is like essentially a gigantic Excel spreadsheet. There's lots of facilities. So if I were to take this and I could sort by the priority column and get all the ones at the top, and then I categorize them, and then I produce a pie chart. Would that 125 million cover all of the priority ones, not all the priority ones? No?
No.
Just trying to get a little bit more like details of like what.
And the reason why we chose 125 is because we made a commitment when we went out for the 120 million. That we would keep debt service at a predictable percentage of our budget as it grew, right? Our budget grows every year. Just the cost of doing business, it's a wonderful thing, right? And the debt service grows accordingly, and we're trying to keep that at 7%. So we had our fiscal advisors look at our long-range planning of sort of what we think our budget's going to be over the course of time, identify what 7% of that budget would be, and then say, look, if you really wanted to do this for the next 10 years, you cannot exceed a certain amount of money, because you will not be able to keep that commitment to the public. You will go over 7% of your budget, and your debt service line will be larger than what you had made a promise to the community about, right? And so the reason, again, we explain this, and I'll do it very briefly, the 7%, it is nice to keep your debt service line consistent as a portion of your budget, because it does contribute to your tax cap calculation. And you don't want to have fluctuations in your debt service line, because it does impact your ability to levy taxes. It's a very important part of the formula of the tax cap. So whatever it is, trying to keep, and you can fluctuate a percentage, right? But like fluctuating more than 1, 2, you're starting to get into territory now of impacting your levy and your ability to levy. That's right.
So just for clarification, we've talked about this so much, but not the people that are here currently. Anyway, so 125, which you really, what you're doing when you look at the 125 is you're subtracting 40, because the bus garage and infrastructure is an absolute necessity. The bus garage was built in 1967.
Chris showed those beautiful plans, right? Of like, was built for how many buses? Like, yeah.
Right. So, I mean, I think as one of my colleagues said in a meeting, like, even if we were to not go with 40 million, we'd have to eventually anyway. The bus garage needs to be replaced. So that leaves us with 85 million. And if you look at that over 10 years, that's 8.5 million a year, which is kind of what we need just to kind of keep the buildings going, especially with the 59 cents return on the dollar. Because otherwise you're wasting money if you're borrowing from the fund balance, because then you're not getting the return. Is my summary kind of, that kind of what we're looking at?
I think that is a really accurate summary.
I would add one caveat,
Mm-hmm.
that it's up to 8.5 million. There's nothing that demands that we have to spend the entirety of that. Right, and even our last capital project, towards the end, there was conversation amongst the board that we were a couple million below what we were authorized, and we said, that's exactly where you want to be. You want to be under that number. And so even if we were to go out with 125 as the number, there's nothing that mandates the district, whoever the elected body may be, decides to spend that entire 125.
Right, because we'll
Right?
work
So
with our,
6 million a year is all I'm saying, right?
Right.
because we can always work with fiscal advisors to adjust principal and interest payments. Remember that, you know, there are certain summers you might do 12 and then you might do 6, right? Like that is going to be very real for us. But it's not, we're not paying back that 12 million or that 6 million in that year. Remember, this is just like your mortgage. You're setting up a payment plan, right? Over the course of time. It's 15 years for us for state aid or however long the bond is, right? So typically we track that and you can adjust principal and interest payments so that we can stay within that threshold.
If I can ask one more question that, Katie, I think you were interested in. So if we were to look at the building condition survey, right, or
The facility evaluation.
this document, and try to work through, I know one of the questions were, how does the district decide what projects to take on? Who is a part of that conversation? Where does the board come into play? Am I correct in that this is one of the questions you were interested in?
Board meetings ago, it might have been repeated in the last facilities and finance meeting, because there was an actual flow chart.
And you got your answer then with it.
I got mine. And it's publicly available. So there's a slide that puts all of the stakeholders and specifically the order in which voices come into the deciding of the project.
I should have assumed that Amanda emailed you. 6 p.m. meeting. Assume that that's it. So a couple other hands as well, Elder.
First of all, trying to figure out a way to say it as eloquently as I could. That's really helpful. And to Amanda's credit, she gives the best analogies. You know, she makes the best pie charts. But I would actually frame what we're doing differently. Mortgages are regular budget. All of us who own homes, if we're wise, we're putting away money for the eventual thing that we can't foresee. Right? Obviously, large landlords do this. I had 3 homes. I used to do this as well. You don't know if it's going to be the furnace. You don't know if it's going to be the washing machine and the pipes burst because the little rodents eat through it. You don't know what it's going to be. But we know if we are not doing that, and that rainy day comes, either we've got the money hidden under a tree, or we're using our credit cards, or we're doing something extraordinary. We work hard to keep the credit of this district at A++ for a reason. I don't know what it'll be like in 3 years. I don't know what it'll be like in 6 years. I know now with this assembled group, or at least the remnants of it, we're $250 million in. We can track a dime. And we got really good at this, which is why this particular staff is so important to us. Right? They're not just replaceable, they're not cogs in the wheel. And we won't always be here. Not Dr. Brown, not Amanda, not myself, but to the extent we are here for the duration, I'm confident we can help the new board members be in the same place. We don't have to fear big numbers. Right? And I understand the instinct to go small. I've actually thought that sometimes myself, Jill, because that way we could communicate more specifically to the taxpayers, right? This time we're going out to fix the pool, we're going out to fix the roofs. Next time we're going out to fix the boilers, we're going out to fix the driveways. But as I've said repeatedly, I'll say it one more time here in public, $1 today is more valuable than $1 we get in 6 or 7 years.
Additional board comments, questions,
I have one last question.
please.
I mean, so the bus garage was built in 1967. I'm at 2 schools every single day because of my life. And they're aging buildings. So I'm just, I mean, all of our buildings are aging. I'm just curious if you know off the top of your head what year they were each built, because to me, like.
From before 1960.
Some before.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well before. Keep it high school.
1922.
Bill Sherman's 1922. BGM is in 1930s range. Yeah.
Northeast was 1964.
High school was 61.
Yeah.
And Jam, I think, is our oldest building. No, not the new BGM.
Bill Sherman main building. Yeah, 1920.
100 years old.
And BJM is not an elementary school. I can't say that enough. I've been built as a middle school. We have packed that sucker up
I like
in more ways than possible, but it is not.
So there, were you asking us a question after?
I have a couple very boring questions. Rattle.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the actual, they're labeled Jamesville to Witt Central School District, but those documents, are the actual. Yeah, it's okay.
Which in board docs, they have
In board
a
docs.
weird name, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, from the attorneys
Yeah.
helping us along and helping other districts. Right? That's not my question. I'm curious as to whether or not
Right.
the word the projects. Whereas the action is defined and the district is defined, the project is not defined, so that's just a note. As I was reading through, I thought, okay, the project should probably be defined. And I'm curious as to what, so it says 5-year district-wide capital improvement projects in each of them. Whether or not that is what it is, 5 years. So I'm curious about that, and I'm curious about the payoff time. Is the payoff time 15 years by standard when we fund these? Okay.
Oh, yeah, they take, and that's when the aid rolls back as well, right?
Okay.
So, and I say that. I'm gonna start with the last question.
You don't have to answer any of these questions.
No, it's
They're not substantive, just things that I know.
The financing, I'm just as brief as possible. Sometimes we go out for things that have to be paid off within 5 years. They're called BAMs, which is an anticipation notice, but we always convert them to bonds before that happens.
Okay.
So just so you
And
know.
bonds are 15.
Bonds are 5. So just so you know that there's a fluidity between those two things, right? And then DASNY is a little bit different. That's a different type of financing. And so I'm just gonna say 15 because that's typical, right?
Okay.
As far as what the attorneys prepared for us, I apologize that it was a different school district. I'm not sure how that didn't get changed. They
Maybe
definitely
feel
did
solidarity
prepare
with
for us.
another district. that's doing
There
something.
is intentionality with the project not being defined. Because even if we're gonna do the 15 million, right? Even if we're gonna do the 15 million, that has yet to be, until that like literally gets submitted to state ed. Right? We don't know exactly what they're gonna find in terms of asbestos abatement. Or failed wiring or panels that are so archaic that we thought that we could switch out whatever. Now they don't even exist anymore. Soil condition, right? So the projects typically in seekers, remember, this is step 1 that gets defined better as we go forward.
Okay.
So by law that follows, right? And then you said something about the timing. Maybe I'm not
Each
sure.
one just in that first paragraph reference in connection with a future 5-year district-wide capital improvement. I just didn't know if that 5-year in this context or not.
Right, we continue to talk about it, this 10-year, and each of the resolutions say 5 years in the very first.
Yeah,
paragraph.
And that's very much in the weeds. I mean,
Yeah,
It's
absolutely. Absolutely, and let me find out from Kathy Bennett, who is our Bond Shenick King. So Bond Shenick King supports us with these resolution. Then we have a separate bond council. And I mean that bond like as in like money. And that's Oric, and they're out of New York City. So we will bring them in as well. But let me check and see why this says 5 years, or if that's something having to do with seeker, or if it's just an error.
Okay, and so when
Let me find that out.
we go to vote next week, we're voting on a document like this, like as attached here.
Step 1 must be a seeker.
Okay.
It must be a seeker, and it does not have to include the amount of money, but we really felt like those two things should go together so that we have guidance in terms of our design development.
I'd like to be clear to our board members, we don't have to vote on any of these resolutions. It's not a requirement. It wouldn't be wise, right? Especially if we're bringing on a bunch of electric buses to at least not consider one of them. But the board is not mandated to approve any of these capital programs above and beyond what we have. So yes, will they be on an agenda for next board meeting? The answer is yes, but I just want to make sure that we're also clear that we have multiple options at us.
I have one last question. The bus timeline, though, Like, that is distinct, right? Is that a 5-year project?
So 2027, right, we are not allowed to purchase any buses that are not electric in New York State. And by 2035, all vehicles on the road must be electric.
So the bus garage does have a distinct, like, that project has to be complete within.
As of right now, the way the legislation is written, that is the language of the law.
Unless we just jack, you know, Trader Joe's and all their machines out front to charge our buses.
There you go. Yeah.
And we do have chargers, we do
Not enough.
we have one in Enfield, one in Caroline, and four at the bus garage, and we're installing 4 more, early spring, late spring.
Board colleagues, these are all great questions, and I want to make sure people have space. I also know at some point in time, we start recycling questions as well. So are there additional questions that we feel need to be answered or stated? Yes, Garrett, please.
So I would make a very sensitive to the sentiment that case for what could be, this is a case that Professor Frank discussed this morning, and then that could be the cost savings to improve the larger number. My building on campus is 4 stories, and if you look at it, the 4th story is different from the first 3. And the reason is in the middle of the construction, Great Depression hit, and commodity and labor prices plummeted. And the university had cash to take advantage of that. Now, I'm not predicting a depression, I hope it doesn't happen, but all kinds of things cause the price of commodities and the price of labor to jump up, to jump down, things that are hard to understand. You know, the real estate market in China can cause the price of steel to plummet in unexpected and unforeseen ways. What I want our team is to have the financial wherewithal to take advantage of those unexpected changes in prices and pounce on those opportunities. So if we have the pre-approval for the credit, when those opportunities arise, there's a glut of labor, for example, and contractors are bidding low to fill that glut, I want us to be ready to jump on it. If we have to then go back to the voters, and that's another 6, 8, 12 months process, we lose the window of opportunity.
Imagine us, to piggyback on that, imagine us having to go back to the voters. Recently, at the same time, prices of timber and wood went to the roof. We would have gotten the approval because our credit is still good. What we would have been able to produce for that would have been significantly diminished because these prices skyrocket. Whereas if we have the money in hand, we can skip over that. Put a coat over that puddle, and say, we'll come back to the wooden structures later. Right now, we're gonna do steel, and we're gonna do asphalt, and we're gonna do something else. Cool.
A couple steps.
Adam,
I just have one more question. Yeah.
please.
Does anything change about the 58 or 59 cents that we get back per dollar that we spend? So in other words, because we're gonna spend that slowly. So as we spend, we're gonna get basically a discount on the dollars that we spend, but there's no advantage to ask for a larger or smaller credit line in terms of that. Does that change in the future?
I mean, building aid, transportation aid, that can always change based on the factors, right? So it's usually about our attendance, our enrollment, our wealth factor, right? So there's a bunch of things that contribute to that. So we have seen those things fluctuate. Probably a couple cents here and there. I don't think we've ever gotten below 54 cents in my recollection. And I don't think we've ever jumped over 60.
Yeah, I know we have not.
So they typically range, but
And it happens as we spend it anyway, so.
it's right, and I don't know, I don't think there's a stated crystal ball kind of way to predict that. To be honest, I really don't, but there are people, like, we could definitely work with state aid planning to see how that is determined.
But we're not like locking in a rate by.
No.
And I would just add to be sensitive that the political winds can also move in different directions about whether or not we're providing more of the state's budget towards education or something else. That's something that we've also been considerate of and thinking about long-term planning. Doesn't mean it may impact us in some other states that swing a little bit more heavily than we do, but that can always end up possible. So for my board colleagues, anything you want to direct our team to do before next week?
I just wrote the email to the attorney, the staff, I'll hop in it.
Project is capitalized, so I'm just looking for a definite.
Well, are we going to continue discussion at the facilities committee?
Right, we have facilities and finance on Thursday.
Mhm.
There is an opportunity to revisit any of these conversations or topics. I don't know if the agenda is already set for both. of
Karen
these.
will be chairing facilities, and the agenda is set, but it could certainly be added to.
We have
That
this,
is on the agenda.
it is on the agenda, there are no attachments to it. But again, if there were reference documents that were helpful, we can absolutely add that for Thursday.
And finance, would there be a need to have that conversation with finance as well, or is that just a doubling of the same discussion?
I'll be there for facilities and see what's left. I mean, sure, there's some things hanging out there that you wanted us to do in finance that we haven't done because we've been doing all this and it's learning together. So maybe we throw a couple of those on.
Any additional things? We'll be meeting with Dr. Brown and Ms. Talbot on Thursday for agenda setting. I just want to make sure that we're yielding to the desire of the board of if there's anything else we want for preparation. And I know Joe had made a recommendation as well about something in the middle. I don't know if that's something that board members want to have access to. Should we put it? Should we remove the 15? Because I don't think anyone's talking about that as well. And I just want to make sure that we're all have time to process, think, and vote in the best interest.
And the other way to deal with what I'm suggesting would be an amendment. Rather than rewriting a resolution, I could just amend the.
Yeah.
Vote to it.
So all set by the board, we'll bring these, whatever discussion happens in facilities and finance, and we'll also bring these agenda items back on the 19th for a vote. And at that point in time, we would be asking the board to vote on one of the resolutions to give us enough time to plan and be in the timeline of getting something on a ballot for May.
For my part, I'm not really looking towards plan A, but maybe something in between plan B and plan C could be beneficial at least to just chew on, because I've been really grateful, like you said, we're learning together. And I've been grateful for all the answers I've gotten through this process. That might be useful. Plus being able to be responsive to somebody that beyond the transportation.
And I've already chewed and I'm looking at option C, so I'd like us to continue the discussion around that because we have sufficient information. We've been looking at the preliminary planning, the graph that Chris provided, Amanda provided, and looking at 2035 and working our way backwards. Are we ready? And what do we need to do to set ourselves in preparation?
So if it's okay with the board, I'm gonna push in a direction that Joe recommended and not ask our team to do any additional work between now and Thursday. But that if there is an amendment that you'd like to make on Tuesday, we could have that conversation as well. Like some of the planning, the long-term plan we're talking about wouldn't have to be done prior to our. We can always make that happen. Again, for the board and the community, even if the district were to put this out there, and if we were fortunate enough to have our community approve it, we still have significant oversight in terms of the money that is allocated to particular projects as well. On to agenda items. I'm going to apologize you all. I'm gonna give us a 5-minute break just to transition, if that is okay with my board colleagues. So we're gonna break for 5 minutes and come back at 8:30 and continue our meeting. That work? Fantastic. Thank you. Yes. 110.3 ICSD policy against discrimination, harassment of employees for a second reading and adoption this evening. And we have asked Ms. Talcott to come to the table and give us a quick overview of our process more after this policy.
Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Lily Talcott again, Deputy Superintendent for the school district. And we've been working diligently in policy committee. Moira chairs it with Erin and Katie. And this is comes from a model policy that both NYSBA and the New York State School Boards Association and also our attorneys suggested that updates the laws for labor law in New York State around sexual harassment and discrimination. So it replaces the policy that we had to adopt in 2018, which was new, it was brand new in New York State. Hey, you have to have a sexual harassment policy if you have more than 50 employees. You also have to have an interactive training every year for every employee. So it replaces that, and it also expands it out to all forms of discrimination. So ultimately, we'll probably be working with the policy committee around abolishing some of our other ones because it's now all encompassing. Biggest updates are around, that it doesn't have to be severe and pervasive to be sexual harassment, right? It can have the purpose or effect of creating a hostile work environment. The other, and that was from 2018, but they kind of expand that a little more. The other thing that's really big is around the gender spectrum. So there's a lot of more specific information about the gender spectrum as of 2023, right? Recognizing that gender is fluid and ensuring that folks have a common understanding. And then the third thing is bystander training for employees. That's required now from New York State. So if two employees are witnessing, one employee is witnessing another employee sexually harassing someone, there are now specific elements of our training that help us understand how to either intervene or go tell someone.
Okay, questions from board members? Well, policy 9110.3. None. I guess we will call the question. Again, this is for second reading and adoption. And a reminder that, again, all of our policies are fluid and can be changed at any point in time as well. So without much more discussion, all in favor of second reading and adoption? I'm just trying to move things along, Tricia. Don't try to keep me on task.
The motion to approve policy 9110.3 for a second reading and adoption.
Second. Moved by Aaron, second by Adam. Thank you very much, Tricia. We appreciate that. Now, any additional discussion? Because we're going to follow protocol. Fantastic. We'll call the question. All in favor? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That brings us to our next policy, which is policy 5150.1 pre-K enrollment for a first reading. And before we ask Ms. Tuckett to speak to this, we will entertain motions. This is a first reading. If it passes, we will go back to the policy committee for a further review and then brought back to the board for a second reading and adoption. But we'll entertain motions for a first reading if anyone is so willing.
I move to approve policy 5150.1 for first reading.
Second.
Moved by Aaron, second by Katie.
I'm happy to provide some context. For many, many years, we were able to operate our pre-K program through a lottery system based on income bands according to the federal poverty guidelines for that given year. And that is no longer the case. We cannot do that anymore. So we combine all of our funding for universal pre-K, which is from the state, Head Start, which is from the federal government, that is funneled, the funding through it, of which is funneled through Tompkins County Community Action. And then preschool special education fund. We take all of these and we create this amazing integrated program, right? Universal pre-K, the laws for the state are very clear, and we no longer have any sort of waiver. We have to do just a straight lottery, and we can't take into account any sort of income. So we are going to do different lotteries for different spots and still create a wonderful integrated program. Where we've worked with lots of lawyers and people directly at the state, It was very kind, but very serious that we've always done this, and no, there are no exceptions.
Questions, discussions?
No question. So there is still a lottery component.
Yep.
And for families who are above the poverty line.
This may not be a question for you, it's more a question, how far away are we from just universal free day?
We do not have a waiting list for 4-year-olds right now, and we have empty spots in classrooms.
So over the years, have we increased space?
Overall, yes.
So if income is not a acceptable factor, are there other acceptable factors that might be better than a lottery in terms of allocating spaces to those who are in greater need?
The universal pre-kindergarten regulations don't permit us to use anything, any factor whatsoever.
That's an answer. Thank you.
If we were lower down on the map. Or location wise.
Or a big five, right, yeah, basically a big five.
Additional questions, comments?
Just roughly, how many spaces do we have now? Then like an approximate number.
Okay, so we have 187 you can place spots and 53 Head Start spots. Some of those are within the community.
Probably wrong. Only. The skis classes are only for the pre-K bands, right? Not Head Start.
The special class integrated setting, or SKIS for short, is 12 class maximum taught by a preschool special education teacher. And it's an inclusive environment that has 6 students with IEPs or individualized education plans who qualify for preschool special education services through the Committee on Preschool Special Education. And 6 students who do not have IEPs. We welcome children who are as young as 2.5.
In those places.
Yeah.
I would encourage my curriculum colleagues to have us visit one of those classes. Only because when I started taking a trip, it was very obvious which child is which. Now we'd be hard pressed to make any distinctions because teachers have gotten so adept at melding them together.
Additional questions, comments for a first reading?
First of all, the SKIS classrooms sound amazing, and I'm really grateful that our district can do that and provide opportunities for everyone to have a safe and loving classroom and be really successful. So thank you for that. When I was reading this, the only thing that stuck out to me was the timing of when people would be notified of preschool acceptances. Because it says the last week of June, which is like very, very early. Then the second round is the last week of July, which is a bit later, but then the final round is held in the second week of August. And I know that right now, anyone who wants a spot basically was able to secure it, and that's wonderful. But I am a little worried about it being in the second week of August, because if unfortunately the district cannot give a child a space, then parents do have to scramble a bit for childcare, which childcare is very expensive. It's definitely very stressful on the parents. I was wondering, is there a way we could maybe like have the pre-K application review held in the last week of May, and then the second round of application review is the last week of June, and then the final round is the second week of July, and maybe just make it like earlier, about 2 weeks to a month, to give parents a little more leeway at the end of August.
I love that you're thinking about other people's experiences, and as parents, as caregivers, you're totally right. It is
It is a, when I've got pregnant, I would, how am I gonna handle, daycare moving forward, right? I have a 2-year-old now and a 4-year-old. So I appreciate that and absolutely understand and thank you for thinking of other folks. We also have some folks, we have a relatively transient community because of TC3 Cornell and college. And so one of the things that there's no real perfect formula for this, but one of the things that we've noticed is some folks will move here and they're, going to graduate school at Cornell and they're like, well, I need to get my kid in school. And so having a series of them, we found allows us to catch more folks.
The other
Timing's not
factor,
perfect.
yeah, the other factor is that these school evaluations of children from early, who are transitioning from early childhood, the county early intervention, those kids get evaluated all summer long as well. And so they have to figure out who needs the space most. Because I think all the special ed spaces within the self-contained or the SCIS classes are filled, that there's some priorities there. So there's some advantage to not letting everyone know until August, because there are kids who are still being evaluated, whether they moved in or they just come to someone to notice.
Yeah, I want to echo the question about the consideration of the timeline. I think that's fantastic. I also know that my family usually leaves the first week of August because of the city swell that takes place, right? That a number of folks are signing August 1st leases. And so the folks who have been here recognize that the city is a significantly different traffic pattern. I don't go to Wegmans, right? I'm sorry, Mr. Malcolm, I don't mess around, but I understand what you're saying, but because of the, about 35% of our population. That's a big population, and my colleagues, my faculty colleagues usually move on August 1st with their families as well. So if they weren't able to participate prior to that, that may cause some difficulties on the other hand. But it's something for us to pay attention to and consider.
And I guess I'll agree with it.
Yep, that's the thing.
Yeah, and just, for context, as somebody who said children on preschool waiting list for 3 years still in the city. A lot of times offers are made the first week of March, but I don't know if that's helpful. Like if we are doing a phased approach, these good intentions.
You're saying private preschools offer.
Yeah, and they're saying you need to let us know and put down a deposit right now. And so I could see a situation where I'm just thinking, we have no idea if we even have a spot in UPK. And so the season is long.
There are questions that we can address at the next policy meeting as well, to have an additional conversation about that. This is our first reading, we'll be bringing back to the board. So if there are no other discussions, we'll call the question. All in favor of approval for our first reading? Universal. Did I mean universal? I'm using the wrong language. Yep, and ends, that's what I'm talking about. And then we'll go to agenda item 11.4, which is policy 8130.2, workplace violence prevention policy. And this is also a policy for a first reading. And the appropriate way, can you speak to it? And then I'll ask for a motion.
Okay, sounds good. We've been meeting with a really great group of folks, by the way, to work on the workplace violence prevention program, policy, forms, training, etc. And so we're working with union leaders and district office folks. Big shout out to David Isley and Catherine Cernera, who wordsmithed this policy itself. Thank you. And provided very specific feedback that we incorporated and brought to the policy committee. And then there was a paragraph that we had discussed during policy committee last week, and I had indicated that by Friday, I would get a different draft along. And you'll see, because we tracked changes, there were several iterations of what that paragraph could be, and it includes information about danger. And in consultation with lawyers, and some other folks, we just changed that paragraph to read that if there is imminent danger, that folks will engage the district safety plan. And, you know, we go through it a little bit more in the program itself. But that's probably one of the biggest areas. And then the other area that we discussed at some length was the investigation, right? Appropriately investigated versus thoroughly investigated. And it now says thoroughly investigated in a manner which matches, or essentially matches the claim, right?
Entertain motions and then we'll be able to discuss.
A motion to approve policy 8130.2 for first reading.
Second.
Moved by Adam, second by Karen. Discussion, questions, comments? I get the impression it's gonna be a very active policy meeting. January 2nd, whatever the policy. Is. Hearing none, we'll call the question. All in favor of approval for a first reading? It is unanimous, so I think the first one. Fantastic. This brings us to one other agenda item, which is 12.1, which is other discussion items, and I believe Dr. Tripp has something to share with the board.
Yeah, briefly, I just wanted to report on a couple of visits that I made. Because I didn't see any other place to do that in an agenda, and a few weeks ago, I spent a long morning at Fall Creek Elementary. And then stayed for the afternoon and their staff meeting, observed several classrooms. And had a number of meetings with people in addition to the staff meeting. And as usual, the school is running beautifully. And I saw lots of really nice, positive engagement by staff and students throughout my time there. It was nice to go back to a place where I worked for years. My other meeting that I wanted to share with you was with the school psychologists a few weeks ago. And they had several concerns that I wanted to share with you. One was that there was a general perception of lack of options that they had and that the district had for children with severe behavior disorders. Just to share that can be part of a larger discussion at some point, but there was a real sense of frustration among the people in that group about what to do with kids who are being very disruptive to their own and other people's education. And we talked a little bit about the history of what we've done in the past and what we hope to do in the future and we're doing now. But that was an ongoing concern, as was the sense that there were an excessive number of referrals or evaluations. So I just thought I would share that information. And again, it was nice to meet with former colleagues and talk with people and let them know some of the issues around what the board is doing and how they can access the board should they choose to.
Can I just echo that? I was able to visit Enfield this last week and have a couple times. They're one of the schools that I need a liaison to. And a similar sentiment regarding wondering if there are more options as far as what to do with like, very, very disruptive behavior. I'll email with more detailed list by specific notes, but that was the most vocal feedback.
Thank you. The historian of me wants us to be careful that what I have witnessed is a continuous sort of pendulum swing. That the district swings, and not just the district, the field of education swings in response, and oftentimes there's an overcorrection. And then we have to overcorrect the overcorrection, and we sort of keep going back and forth. So however we engage in this conversation, I'd like for it to be extremely thoughtful in terms of long-term, and I know we've been down this path and doing it. But that's been my experience is that, you know, we recognize some difficulties and then we find a way. And just as a personal example, I've done it this semester in my own class with my attendance policy, right? I was witnessing some bad attendance and I overcorrected, right? And now I got to find what the happy medium is. Maybe it's I just don't go to class anymore.
Retirement.
A dress.
Retirement. That is my dream job. I want you to know. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Eldred, and then I'm mindful of time when people.
I was just gonna say, I'd like to keep in mind that maybe it's important to break down this idea or disrupt it, right? I can show you my 5th grade report card now. You'd see I was a very disruptive child, but my academics and my IQ are off the chart. Right, so disruptive in this society has almost become equated to some kind of behavioral issue that a child might need some kind of IEP or correction on. That is absolutely not the case. The question I always ask when I hear disruptive, why is that child being disrupted? Are they bored? Do you not take them into consideration when you're making up the curriculum? Do they not see themselves in any of the materials you use? Is that teacher sensitive to something outside their own identity? Everything I said made me wildly disruptive. Did not mean these children or any children have problems, right? So we could disassociate that or have the professionals in the room help us unpack that, right? So I'm disruptive. You send me to a psychologist, I kick him in the shin. Does it mean I'm a bad kid? I don't want to be with him, and I don't want to be with that teacher, right? So how do we navigate that, to Sean's point, so we aren't continuing to recycle this path, which we've seen be so disruptive in the past?
And I spent 30+ years in this, so I too have seen the cycles and the definitions and all the rest. I'm sharing what a group of my former colleagues had to say, and I can assure you they were talking about things that I used disruptive as a nice example of a word.
Maybe this is a conversation that we try to find time to be on a curriculum committee, and there may be another committee that may be more appropriate, but we'll connect with that.
Yeah,
Without blaming teachers, without blaming students.
absolutely.
I'm just helping.
Oh, because that the third thing the psychologists were concerned about is they felt, sorry, Mary, I think Mary anyway, that there was very little RTI going on in their buildings.
Excited for more.
Yes.
I'm hearing
Yeah,
eagerness.
yeah,
All right,
Yeah.
we'll-
yeah, I was surprised too, but
we'll kick that to a committee conversation as well, and put it on a future.
You bet.
So thank you very much. If there are no other discussion items, we do have 2 committee meetings. I apologize. We have a safety plan public hearing scheduled for Thursday at 5 p.m. This is the public's opportunity to review our safety plan. It is up on the district site. You can find additional information, including contacting Dr. Bryan if you have any questions, who's taking the lead on this. I will be present. Board members are not required to attend, but please do feel free to do so. Then we will have facilities committee at 5:30 and finance committee at 6:30, if I'm not mistaken. That will be on Thursday. And then we have a school board meeting Tuesday, the 19th, the week of break. I know you all are eagerly trying to. So with that being said, we'll bring the meeting to a close. Thank you all. Have a good evening.